The Reproductive Rights Bill seeks to bring up to date our somewhat archaic legislation. This private member's bill was brought forward by Tanya August Philips MLC and addresses matters relating to fertilization, embryology and surrogacy. We've also had some important international tax orders in Tynwald and an income tax bill going through Keys. On agenda tonight, we attempt to explain why these pieces of legislation matter. Encouragingly, a tax bill in Keys tends to mean more money to pay for essential services, and it would appear that we're not paying this time. We'll hear from Tanya August Philips, formerly August Hanson. Congratulations, Tanya, if you're listening. But first, Treasury Minister Alex Allinson. Tucked at the end of a very long, busy November order paper, there were two orders which looked relatively innocuous. And indeed, if we listened to what you had to say, it was we heard a lot about the detail about what was in the orders. But these are quite big ticket items. It's a big change that's going through here.
It is. These were about corporate tax, and possibly the biggest change we've had since 010 was brought in, which was very much an Isle of Man initiative that was then followed by Jersey and Guernsey. What we did in Tynwald was bring in legislation to provide for what are called the Pillar 2 rules. And this is something that's been developed over a number of years by the OECD to look at large multinational companies who have a global turnover of over 750 million euros, and actually making sure that they pay the right tax in those areas where they're making the profits. And it's trying to level the playing field for large companies. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't really affect the Isle of Man. But actually it does. We have around about 200 companies and probably about 700 entities working and operating on the Isle of Man who will now be paying this tax. Now, this isn't in any way, hopefully, changing what we do in terms of them, but it's making sure that the tax they pay anywhere else, they pay the same tax here. And it levels that playing field. It also provides extra revenue, but also provides a sense of fairness, really, that hopefully in the future you won't have companies creating profits in various countries and then siphoning it off into others. And that there are some provisions within the GLOBE rules looking at developing countries to make sure they're not disadvantaged. It won't really affect us. We don't have any Isle of Man-based companies providing services in sub-Saharan Africa or places like that. But it means that we will be maintaining our international reputation in terms of a well-regulated tax jurisdiction.
And I suppose the important thing for Tynwald at the moment is that there is some millions of tax that will come into the Treasury coffers as a result of this.
Yeah. In the February budget, we made the initial changes, which were to increase the tax from banks and large retailers who would be covered by these changes. We did that in February, so they're already paying 15% tax as opposed to 10% tax. And that's some of the larger retailers that you might see in Strand Street and just down the road, who are operating in the UK and internationally. So that will bring in some extra money for this financial year. The changes we've brought in now will operate from the 1st of January 2025. That's in line with the UK. But also in line with Jersey and Guernsey, and we've been working together with their governments to make sure that we all move at the same time. And that's been quite important when you're dealing with the international reputations of the Crown dependencies. It's important that we do the right thing and that we're seen to do the right thing. Again, this is an international tax, so if we weren't to bring it in, it would be taxed by other jurisdictions. So it's absolutely right that the profits made on the Isle of Man come back to the Isle of Man to invest in the infrastructure here. It's difficult to know exactly how much will come in to Treasury with these. We've made an estimate of around about £35 million a year extra revenue that we're not currently collecting. And obviously, a large part of that will need to be put back in to fund the Island Plan and the economic strategy of investing in our infrastructure, investing to keep our business competitiveness, but also looking at extra money going into things like health and education as well.
And I'm guessing this is, well, certainly it's always been, certainly in my time in Council of Ministers, the time of year at which big decisions are being taken behind closed doors in Council of Ministers about next year's budget. So this sort of additional income is, I'm guessing, very welcome.
It is. We've been planning for this for several years. And so a lot of the income has already been factored into the medium-term financial plan that we've got. Now, people say, well, what's he talking about? Every pink book will do projections for the next 5 years. And a lot of those projections recently have been trying to get us back into a more balanced budget where we're not needing to draw down from reserves. Now, extra tax income is one way of doing that, but also it's absolutely imperative, as the Chief Minister said, that we look at efficiencies across government. We cannot keep on spending taxpayers' money as we have been. We have to get a grip on the government expenditure and the amount we spend. We have to be more efficient. We have to be more productive. Otherwise, these sort of taxes could very easily just be eaten up. I mean, £35 million is a huge amount of money. But when you've got our health service spending about £1 million a day, you can see how quickly that could go into the essential frontline services we need. So it's absolutely right. We get government efficiency in terms of everything we do. So some of this extra tax revenue can be used to invest in extra facilities, in extra services, in extra infrastructure that we need to go forward as an island.
You've also got an income tax bill, and whereas income tax bill for many of us is not a good thing, for you this is a tidying up exercise, is it?
It is. So the way we work in the budget is we bring through what are called temporary taxation orders, TTOs, in the budget about tax matters, and then we then have to bring through a proper bill through the House of Keys, as any other bit of primary legislation will come through, within the next 12 months. So we had the first reading of the Income Tax Bill 2024. There are no real surprises here. A lot of it is tidying up exercises. A lot of it brings in some of the tax changes we brought in February and establishes them in statute. So those were particularly around collecting extra tax and changing some of the terms from just trades to bring in officers, so that people who were operating offices here should also pay tax on the profits of that here. So it's clarifying that. It also brought in taxation on exploration for hydrocarbons, so drilling for oil or gas, which we don't have at the moment, established that in our taxes. But on top of that, there is some tidying up exercises and getting rid of some typing mistakes and other errors. And interestingly, it also looks at the tax status of people who may start or stop living together during the tax year and the personal allowances that they get for that. Because at the moment it's people who are married or in civil partnerships, and this is expanding it a little bit to include more people who are living together, I think, in a more equal way.
And of course, the reason that you have to do these things in this way is when you announce the budget, you haven't got time to then go and have a full sitting of the House of Keys and a full sitting of Legco to pass a piece of primary legislation, to pass a bill, to bring it into force. So a temporary order comes through, and then soon after, as the opportunity arises, the bill comes through. Yeah,
this is a natural part of our parliamentary process, and it's a practical way of bringing through some of the sort of more minor changes we might need. Again, the more significant bills that we brought through November Tynwald in terms of international taxation are there on the order paper, and we've had a lot of briefings with these. More than that, what we've tried to do from a Treasury perspective is work with all those companies that would be affected by a new corporation tax, to make sure that they understand our motives, that they are comfortable with the way we're bringing it in. because this is in some ways redressing some of the competitiveness we've had in the past. It's establishing that level playing field for good reasons, but also we need to be absolutely certain that we are still a good place to be based for some of the large banks, insurance companies, large retailers, large companies that make this place our home, pay tax, but also employ a lot of people. So part of that is looking at the overall economy, looking at skills, looking at employment, looking at the infrastructure that we can provide to allow them to carry on operating here.
And of course, you mentioned earlier, it's really important that we, on things like this, when you're introducing a disincentive, I suppose, it's important that we do it at the same time as Jersey and Guernsey. Obviously, if we were about to get some competitive advantage, it's okay to do things in advance of our competitors. But on this one, it's really important that we do it at the same time.
It is. I mean, it's part of us being part of a much wider international community. These rules are being adopted right across Europe, across the UK, across the Irish Republic, who have had a bit of a windfall, and they've talked about that during their election. Our economy is much smaller, and so we're certainly not relying upon this increased income. And what we need to do is invest it in things like connectivity and infrastructure. But also it applies to other places like South Africa, and we do have quite a few South African companies operating here who will be affected. They'll be paying tax in South Africa, they'll be paying tax here, and it'll be the same level. So what we're hoping to do by bringing these rules in is to simplify and standardise things, so that wherever you're working, wherever you're operating, if you're a large multinational company, you know the rules and you know what tax you're paying. Again, if I can just stress, this is for these large multinational companies. The vast majority of companies on the Isle of Man are relatively small and will not be affected by this. We haven't changed the 0-10 policy in terms of that tax, but what we have done is align ourselves to best practice internationally.
And your colleague in Ramsey, Laurie Hooper, has dropped some very gentle little Christmas presents on the Tynwald order paper for you in relation to potential additional tax income. I know you're probably not going to answer this question, but I'll ask anyway. Is government minded to accept those presents from Laurie Hooper?
Well, Laurie Hooper obviously has spent a lot of time with health at the moment. I didn't realise he was a frustrated Treasury Minister, but actually he's made a number of quite significant suggestions in terms of the budget for next year. One of them is in terms of he said that Tynwald is of the opinion that the temporary 22% tax rate should go down to 20%. He's also talked about getting rid of the tax cap altogether next year, and he's also in a very interesting motion, not just suggested but asked members to vote that we charge national insurance on those people who've already retired but have continued working, which would be a change in policy and would actually be counter to some of the government decisions based on consultations that happened all the way back in 2016 about the fairness of that and the equality of that. So there are a number of debates he's brought forward. Also, we have a fascinating motion being brought forward now by Chris Thomas, as opposed to Claire Christian, who's now in council, which is looking at the entire budget process and saying that Tynwald is of the opinion we should publish the budget before we debate it by at least 2 weeks to begin with, and then 3 months. So it's looking more at a sort of Jersey-type system where they publish their budget. There's then time for debate, but also time for amendment. And I think we've seen some of the consequences of that, both in Jersey and Guernsey, when difficult decisions need to be taken, and perhaps some parliamentarians aren't prepared to do that. And that's caused some significant problems in terms of them getting to a balanced budget and getting to some of the perhaps more radical changes that need to be made at a time when we're dealing with quite significant increased costs, but also an increased cost of living and inflation, and trying to pinpoint and target government spending at the priorities that we decide really need that spending, but also make sure that everyone in our society benefits from the prosperity that we have in our economy. So it's going to be a busy December for me, standing up, dealing with those debates. We've also on the order paper got a paper about beneficial ownership, which again is something that we've been talking about for a long period of time in terms of our register, and now making that open to obliged entities. And again, this is something that we've been working with Jersey and Guernsey to bring forward together at the same time to comply with best international standards at a time when we have been criticised by various politicians in the United Kingdom, some even recently, but doing it in a measured, controlled and correct way that does the right thing in terms of tax transparency, but also doesn't disadvantage the people who are quite legitimately operating here and in the Channel Islands.
That was Treasury Minister Alex Allinson. Tanya August MLC has brought forward a private member's bill, the Reproductive Rights Bill 2004. Having read the bill and listened to some of the debate, it does seem to me this should be a government bill. Why is it left to a private member to take this through?
Well, it actually started as a bill that was on the legislative programme for the Department of Health and Social Care, which I've been working with for the last 3 years, responsible for legislation. And it took me sort of a little time to sort of figure out, how are we going to prioritise all of the things that need to be done. One of those was capacity, one of those was children and young persons legislation update, the health reform work. And this basically just fell down to the bottom of the list. And it was something that, I sort of picked up and learnt a little bit more about and figured out, crikey, how have we managed to get into this modern day and age without having addressed this when it's been addressed in most other places, particularly with our neighbours in the British Isles. So I suggested to the Department of Health and Social Care, where it was up to in 2017, so going some years back, give me whatever you've got, bits of research here and there and things, and I will just take it forward. And I will start working up drafting instructions, see if I can get leave to introduce for it, and I'll just do all of the work myself, away from the department and without taking up the resource. So I'd already been in Parliament for a good few years before that point, so I understand the process. I really enjoy working on technical pieces of legislation, and all this does essentially is just bring us up to date with where the UK are at the moment. So it doesn't create a panacea, but it does just get us in line with the UK and get us on a strong footing, in giving some degree of equality as well, in with the mix, and particularly with those of same-sex parentage, but also just in and around the areas of human fertilization, embryology, surrogacy, and some of those areas that just haven't necessarily been given the concentration that perhaps other areas have been given, particularly over the course of this administration so far.
And we've had the evidence stage of the bill now. Perhaps you could tell us who were the two experts that we or that you listened to in your evidence stage.
So one was Mrs. Michelle Moroney. She's the consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist at Nobles Hospital, so she's our local expert. And the other was Professor Richard Anderson. He's a PhD at the LC Inglis Professor of Clinical Reproductive Science at the Centre for Reproductive Health. That's an Institute of Regeneration and Repair at the University of Edinburgh. So he's right at the forefront of working with the HFEA, with the Regulatory Authority, Licensing Authority in the UK, and he's very, very much sort of an innovator, an innovative thinker about all of these things, and forward-thinking, future-proofing. So both of them have been extraordinarily helpful, and I've probably engaged with both of them more than anybody else over the course of working up this piece of legislation. I've worked with public health on this. I've worked with the Isle of Man Law Society and talked to them about it. I've talked to Department of Health and Social Care, Manx Care, the Attorney General's Chambers, the Civil Registry, General Registries. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and we've also had a public consultation as well, which has been quite very, very interesting to sort of get all of those views in and sift through them all, and try and look at the bill and sort of see if we can improve it and make it better. But both of those individuals have been quite key to doing that.
And the obvious question that people would be people listening would like an answer to, and I'm sure you will have is the in a nutshell. Why is this bill important? What does the bill deliver that's going to change people's lives?
So essentially, the Reproductive Rights Bill it represents a comprehensive, thoughtful, modern approach to reproductive rights and parenthood. It puts everybody on an even footing. With the UK, as well they should be, and it's crafted to sort of respect, uphold human rights, ensure clarity and fairness in legal parenthood, and provide a robust regulation of reproductive technologies as well, and ensure that we're keeping up to date with what's going on elsewhere in the world, particularly in relation to surrogacy. So surrogacy is, this might not be in a nutshell, so I do apologise, but surrogacy over in the UK, they need a huge update and modernisation according to the law commissions in both England and also Scotland. And what they've said, they've reported following a huge consultation between the two jurisdictions and in a joint report with draft legislation being suggested to Westminster to move through. And that's very much providing a structure for surrogacy, a regulatory structure for surrogacy, an expectation for those that are undertaking, or wanting to become a surrogate, or those that are needing a surrogate, and the entire process that then involves, in creating fairness and respect in that process. So that's something that we're watching very, very closely here in Parliament, on the Isle of Man, particularly in the Department of Health and Social Care and Government, and it's something that that's a very, very interesting thing for us to be able to sort of bring in, modernise ourselves, and this bill provides the route for that.
Paul Crane is well known for his studies of the Manx population and his alarm at the falling birth rate. He asked Mrs. Moroney, who effectively leads the whole sort of fertility side of things at Nobles, he asked her, is any of this going to improve the fertility rate of the Isle of Man? Is it going to result in more births? And sadly, Mrs. Moroney couldn't give him the positive answer he was looking for.
No, she couldn't. I think a lot of the people that are going through this process would go through this process anyway. It's about how they do it, and whether or not it's a fair process that they're going through. So that's what this bill sort of seeks to address. Yes, I think Mr. Crane is very interested in the population. I think we all are, quite frankly, and I think that Mrs. Moroney also showed some concern as well for what she's seeing in terms of a falling birth rate in her own specialism. So she is very concerned about that. Yes, I think most people probably should be.
Professor Anderson, in one of his... you asked him specifically, did he have any concerns about the bill? And he raised several concerns, which I'm guessing, because there was talk that maybe you would be going straight to clauses after the evidence stage, but there was some food for thought in there. There's a few tweaks, perhaps, that you're going to encourage your LegCo colleagues to bring forward as amendments.
Well, there are already 4 amendments to the bill that have been sort of spotted by myself, and I have Laurie Hooper, who was the Health and Social Care Minister when all of this got started. He'll be taking it through the House of Keys. So he's pointed out a few issues that he would like to see addressed before it reaches Keys. And so has Dr. Michelle Hayward as well, who will be seconding. So I've sort of compiled amendments and shared those with both of those individuals, and Mr. Mercer will be moving those in when we reach clauses stage anyway. So there were 4 different issues that were raised by Professor Anderson. So I will be looking into those, yes, and one of those in particular around sort of azoospermic individuals, and ensuring that we've managed to get the framework for that right and fair, as fair as we can. So I will be looking at that. I'll also be separately to the concerns that were raised by Professor Anderson, I will also have a relook and a rethink around how we've worded the work around licensing and the HFEA, and whether or not perhaps we can tighten things up in terms of, when we're talking about regulation, and we're talking about the structure itself, and we're talking about sort of creating a degree of flexibility, because as Mrs. Moroney says, she's sort of the great expert that we have here on the Isle of Man, and she's somewhat of a one-man band at times, but she does have a good team around her. But she's when she's no longer available to do this work down the line, which I hope is a very long time away, we need to be able to have some degree of flexibility in the system to create what good looks like, essentially. And I don't really want to close things down, or close ideas down, close potential down for being able to flex with that.
I think Professor Anderson described it as future-proofing the bill, making sure that the bill doesn't become outdated too quickly.
Yes, but I don't think that we should ever be. Yes, we should be future-proofing as much as we can, but I do think that this is the type of thing, because it's such a fast-moving sort of concern, that I think that it's something that perhaps does need attention once every 5 years, 10 years or so. I think we need to be looking back and evaluating what we've got. But then again, I think that we should be doing that with all legislation, really, particularly a couple of years after anything has been given an appointed day order. Really, my firm belief is that we should be rethinking, looking at it again. Does it work? Is it right? Does it need changing? Can we do it better? So I do think that that's a really important exercise that is sometimes missed by government.
That was Tanya August MLC. So what do you think? Is it past time we updated our legislation relating to fertility and surrogacy? Is the extra tax generated from large international companies a much-needed bonus for the government? Are you concerned that too many tax changes might drive away the business on which we depend, or do you think it's about time they paid their fair share? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Got a Mayos and Geisachrum. Thanks for listening.